Thank you for joining us here on PM Express. I have a guest in the studio who we haven't heard from in a long time. You can say in ages. But he is one of those people who led the banking sector. He's done banking for more than 20 years. He was instrumental. I mean, people say really you can put CalBank's tremendous success, not only here in Ghana, but globally, to him. He transformed it into a giant in the banking sector as far as Ghana is concerned. He has gone on to do many other things. He's currently the board chair co-founder of the Roman Rich School, another very popular, doing very, very well. The pairs, whatever he touches turns to gold. He's my guest tonight. He says he's retired, but I want to see if I can pick his thoughts on where we are as a country right now, and many things currently happening and had happened, and his views on that. He doesn't shy, he doesn't pull punches, and so I'm delighted to pick his thoughts. He joins me for PM Express tonight. He is Frank Edu Jr. I'm grateful that you agreed to sit down for a conversation.
I don't know what happened. I don't know how I got to agree to this interview.
I was surprised when I was told you said yes, you would do the interview. So let me start by asking, how are you?
Very well, thank you, as you can see.
You look well.
And relaxed.
Very relaxed. What have you been up to? Apart from playing golf with as you do with friends every now and then.
That's all I do.
Playing?
I play golf 5 times a week.
5 times a week? You seem to have a lot of time on your hands to blow. Considering that you're a banker, you never had time.
When you are unemployed, you have time. I
don't believe the unemployment story.
Indeed,
though.
I am unemployed. I do not draw a salary from anybody. I have a pension. And so I play. I'm physical in the morning, I'm cerebral in the afternoon, and I'm social in the evening.
Okay, but people are still tapping into your brain, obviously.
Well, that's why I'm cerebral in the afternoon.
Okay.
In the afternoon, I use my...
So we caught you when you're cerebral?
Correct.
Okay, so who are those tapping into your brain right now? Obviously, this great institution will be Roman Rich School will benefit from that experience, correct?
Correct.
Yes. Who else is tapping into that brain?
So I sit on a number of boards, and lately, and then I mentor a lot of people. Lately, I've accepted the role of chairman of 2 young companies owned by a very young man, 30-something years old. He approached me, needed my help. So I agreed. And I think that is a lot more rewarding because then you're helping to develop the next set of leaders.
Okay.
You know, so those are the kind of things.
So you're invested in the young talent.
But you must invest in the young.
Okay.
Because, you know, when I was growing up, my father said that when you're young, your friends should be at least 25 years older than you. And when you are old, when you're in your 60s, your friends should be 25 years younger. And the reason was this, that when you're young, and your friends are 25 years older than you, first thing, they don't envy you. Second, they like to live their life through you, so they'll stop you from making mistakes that they've made. And they can only help you develop. And then when you're old, you tap into the young because they have the energy. They are driving business, they are driving the economy, they're running the country, you know, so they keep you informed, you know, and they keep you young.
Okay. No wonder you look very, very young, actually.
Thank you very much.
I mean, I'm pretty sure you're almost 70 or 17. Yeah, I don't want to pin that number, but you look very young. I mean, when we hear Frank Edu Jr., you hear banking, leadership. Of course, you hear CalBank too, because that's really what we knew as.
Yeah.
What inspired your banking journey? Have you always wanted to be a banker?
No. I sort of trying to be a lecturer.
Teach?
Yeah. So I did my national service as a teaching assistant. I graduated, I majored in geography and minored in ancient history.
Ancient history?
Yeah, classics. So that was what I came out of university with in 1984. And then I went to teach at University of Ghana. In my second year, well, a number of things happened and I instinctively resigned.
Okay. From teaching?
The same day resigned. And then I bumped around for a year. During that period, I had to take stock and decide what I was going to do with my life. So I started applying to business schools around the world. And then I was called for an interview at Merchant Bank.
Before you could get into school?
Before I could get into business school.
Business school.
And when I went for the interview, Incidentally, one of the panelists of that interview was Mr. Afari Donko, the famed Afari Donko.
Yes. I think he, at the point, had 11% in CalBank.
Same person.
Okay.
So that's how we met. Now, after the interview, we were shortlisted to 2, and the job was given to the other fellow. So I went to Merchant Bank, and I think it was a gentleman called Beecham, Frank Beecham.
Also sounds familiar.
Yes. And he said, well, you did geography, the other fellow did economics. So naturally, although you did well at the interview, you had to give the job to the other fellow. I was so upset. I drove from Merchant Bank straight to University of Ghana and picked up the business school forms. I think this was in June or so, and the next September I was in business school, University of Ghana. So after business school, so I abandoned all my plans to go and do business school overseas. After business school, I was quite lucky. I got a number of offers. GNPC, Chikata, asked me to join GNPC. I was interviewed by Guzitano and all those guys. Unilever tracked me down, gave me a job. EcoBank also gave me a job. EcoBank actually picked me up from home, put me in a CD car, diplomatic car, drove me to Togo. I interviewed there, they gave me the job. And then Afari Donko sent for me and said, based on my performance he had earlier on sent for me and said, based on my performance at the interview at Merchant Bank, he would like to work with me in future. Then I decided to go to business school. So I went to tell him I was going to business school. He says, okay, I should go to business school, but he would still like to work with me. Then he went to CDH. When he went to CDH, I was in business school. So it was after CDH, when I finished business school, and then he says, let's do CalBank. So I came out of business school and I had CalBank, then called Continental Acceptances Limited. I had EcoBank, GNPC, and Unilever. And then I chose CalBank.
Because that, you were just about to start.
Yes.
So
this is August,
from scratch.
This was August 1989. But whilst I was in business school, I got a scholarship. I was offered a scholarship by the school to go and do a PhD at Wharton. And I turned it down. Now my father flipped, because obviously Wharton being Wharton, one of the best business schools in the world, he didn't see why I would turn it down. And I said, look, I've been in school for nearly 10 years, and I really like to work. Then he said, then go to EcoBank, because that is, in his mind, and in everybody's mind at the time, EcoBank was ECOWAS Bank. Yeah. That's international. What is this Continental Acceptances? And I said, well, I actually feel I should do Continental Acceptance, and not EcoBank or Unilever or GNPC.
But you're taking a risk. I mean, this hasn't started, and you want to...
You've got to push the envelope. You know, I mean, Unilever is a safe job. People like my dad, when they came out of university, all they wanted to do was to work for a multinational.
Yeah,
and that was his thinking. To work with Unilever. Yeah, so he says, if you don't do EcoBank, then do Unilever. And I said, no, I'll do Continental Acceptances. So that's how I ended up at Cal.
So that is how. So you started Cal
with Afari.
With Afari Donko.
And a gentleman called Owusu Amwa.
I see. What was the capital requirement at the time?
Yeah, I don't remember.
But it must have been.
I wasn't an investor. I was just the gopher, or Afari Donko's gopher. You know.
Okay. We didn't even. So you also sweat equity.
No, I didn't have equity at the time.
Okay.
Well, he promised the starters equity, but he never gave it to us. But that's another story. You know. But basically, I just did all the groundwork, the laborer's job. Go and buy this, go buy that, go to set up the office, everything.
Okay.
You know, and then March 1990, the office was populated, and I think June or July that same year, we got the final banking license.
So that is how you started CalBank. Yeah. But then you became synonymous with CalBank. I mean, you can't talk about CalBank without Frank.
Only because I was lucky to be made MD in 2000.
Yeah. But that is where most people who read the history say CalBank really took off. Would you say the same for yourself?
Okay, so between 1990 and 2000, CalBank's history was very colorful. and it has remained colorful. I mean, you could write volumes on CalBank, and if it could also be a very good case study for how not to manage a bank and how to manage a bank. I guess that goes for many other companies as well. But I was lucky. Okay, so Afaridonko left the bank in 1995 or so, thereabouts. I don't remember.
But he maintained a stake in the bank.
He maintained a stake in it. And when I drove to the chairman's office, the chairman was then a gentleman called Louis Kisley Hayford,
Okay.
former CEO of VRA, now deceased. May his soul rest in peace. When Afari left, I think I was 33 years old.
So you were very young.
And I went to Mr. Kisley Hayford's office and I asked for the CEO job.
What gave you that audacity?
Because I felt I could do the job.
Wow.
And he says, no, you're too young.
Of course you were.
And I said, well, but he asked me the same question. What made you think that you should come and ask me for the job? And I said, but if you don't ask, you don't receive. So I threw my heart into the game at the time. They didn't give me the job. They eventually brought a gentleman called Kofi Buckner. I think at the time he had left Africa Development Bank and was working with Lehman Brothers also. So he was there for 3 years. And Kofi made me one of his deputies. In 1999, he left. And the board decided that they would give me the job.
That's when you took over finally.
So 2000, I became CEO of CalBank.
Okay. So what defined your tenure, would you say? If you look back now, all these years back, when you took over, you must have an ambition. Did you achieve it? You wanted the job.
Yes, I wanted to.
Now I finally got it.
I wanted to prove a point. I mean, look, it's very interesting, but you know, young people are not given opportunities in this country. So when I got the job, I was 37 years old, and I remember a very big man at the time, and still a fairly influential man, now politically influential, calling me and telling me that even though the job was offered to me, I should have turned it down. And I said, why? He says, because it's not your time. Okay. There are people ahead of you. He mentioned names of other bankers who had been in the banking system for 20, 30 years in other banks who were all looking for the job. And so, having accepted the job, I made a tactical error. And I said, what is this error? What do you mean I made a tactical error? He says, you made enemies. He says, you made 2,000 enemies, including myself. At the time, he was also in the financial sector. Okay. And I counted him as one of my mentors. You know, that, as the guys say, it woke me up. And I'm like, you know, you're going to be up against a lot of resistance. But, you know, I don't necessarily shy away from a fight. So I felt that I had to make sure that I succeeded as a CEO of CalBank. You know, so I set my heart to it.
Did you say you succeeded?
Largely, I think so.
What was your proudest achievement?
I think my proudest achievement is in the people I developed, because, you know, I don't want to go into the story now that it's become like a personality profile thing, and I don't want to do that. But I think my greatest achievements were in the people I employed, and my biggest failure also the people I employed. I tried to look for people who fundamentally were smarter than me, because if the people are smarter than you, then they'll carry you. So it's on their shoulders that I rode to whatever successes that the bank achieved whilst I was there. I was quick to take the responsibility if anything failed, and I was quick to give credit to the others if we succeeded at anything that we did. And that motivated the staff quite a bit. And I'm proud to say that whilst I was there, I think after the first 3-4 years, which were quite tumultuous because you had all kinds of resistance, you know, from those who were older than me in the bank who felt that I was an upstart, etc. You know, and then as it settled, and now I had people working, the turnover of the bank was less than 1%. Now, when you have a situation like that, the new banks were coming up, but people from CalBank were not ready to leave. When you're able to achieve that goal, they know that you're doing something right, because people wanted to work for the bank and people wanted to work for me, and that pleased me a lot.
That was fascinating that the people is the. But I want to go back to my own story as a journalist and ask a question that I've always wanted to ask you. In 2008, I believe, I just started off as a journalist, and then I encountered this phrase, boardroom drama or boardroom. Boardroom.
Wasn't it shareholders? The shareholders. Something
well, I remember the shareholders. Exactly, you're right. And this, I believe, was in 2008 when the shareholders tried to get you removed.
A shareholder.
A shareholder.
With accomplices.
With accomplices. How did you handle that? I mean, I believe it was the 11% shareholder whose name you mentioned.
It was Afari Donko.
Yes, it was Afari Donko.
How did I think it was 2006.
2006, okay.
I just, there's value, there's some value in the saying silence is golden. I just kept quiet. I didn't utter a word during that period.
That's true.
It was a 54-day period between when the notice was served and when the EGM was held. And in those 54 days, I didn't say a word.
But you were working very aggressively to hold on to your job.
Yes, it's interesting. Yes, of course I was, because I didn't know what was going to happen if I lost the job. But I also knew that losing the job doesn't mean I've lost my brain.
So you were actually you embraced the thought of losing the job if you have to?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, there's nothing permanent about having a job. It's not a cradle to grave job for anybody. And in any case, as CEO of CalBank, I never had a contract which went more than 2 or 3 years at a time. So every 2-3 years, I had targets. If I didn't meet those targets, I was fired. But I wasn't unduly disturbed. And the reason why I know I wasn't unduly disturbed is there was a golf tournament which was sponsored at the time by a company, Metropolitan Insurance. And I won the tournament. Now, the EGM was on the following Thursday. The tournament was on Saturday. And I won that tournament. Now, if you're disturbed, you cannot concentrate well enough to play golf. So I remember when the results were announced in the newspapers on Monday that I had won the tournament, Kofi Amwabin called me. He says, Kobna, you could you edit and file where we need. And I said, Kofi, they can take the job, but they won't take my brain. I will apply my gray matter to something else. But again, when you look at that exercise, and today is Monday. Saturday, Afari Donko was here. Okay. We had a graduation ceremony for senior school for the class of 2025, graduating class 2025. One of his grandsons graduated, and I was chatting with him. He's over 80 now, etc. Now, I think it was ill-informed and it was ill-planned, because you see, it was basically a proxy fight. It's a publicly listed company, 22,000 shareholders. To remove the CEO, you need to have 51% of the votes in your pocket. You do not go into a proxy fight when you don't have 51% assured. And he and his advisors, and I know who the advisors are or were, went into this and lost, because they did not control 51% of the stock. Did I control 51%? No. I think that I think thoughtful people, thoughtful shareholders, thought through the whole thing and said, this shouldn't happen, and cast their votes against the motion to dismiss me. Now, if you look at the motion, basically he was asking for me to be removed because I was overambitious. And where did that stem from? the previous AGM, we had gone to the AGM and proposed an increase in the capital of the bank from whatever it was then to $200 million US.
Wow.
And why would we just get up and mention a figure of 200 million? The board had seen their proposal, deliberated upon it, and this was a very serious board, chaired by chaired by the time by G.V. Okun, may he so rest in peace, former senior partner of KPMG, very, very steady, solid guy, you know. And it was because the money had basically been raised. We just had to go through this administrative corporate procedure and get it done. And at the AGM, one person from SNIT got up, and SNIT had agreed. Because there was no way I would go into an AGM if SNIT, the largest shareholder, wouldn't have. And Afari had agreed as well. Long story short, it was shut down at the AGM. A few weeks after, Afari brought this motion to have me removed for being overambitious. And the overambition is birthed in the fact that I tried to raise $200 million US. That's the whole genesis of this thing. That's the story behind this thing. But so at that EGM, he didn't prevail.
So you survived that, and then comes, let's come to the current, because you survived that, and I guess that obviously, I remember very clearly when you did it. It made you even more powerful, at least for me, journalists, like it made you even more famous. And it gave you more capital. Or
infamous.
Well, you can, but it gives you a bit more social capital that you have to now spend on your brand, you know, the Frank Edu Jr. brand. Then comes 2017, 2018. And I go there because the banking sector, if you talk to anybody in the bank, they cite those that year, 2017, 2018, as probably the most difficult for banks in Ghana, right? How did you keep CalBank afloat at that time when a lot of your friends who were owners of banks were being simply dissolved? Amwaba, you mentioned his name, Safed, I've heard him speak quite passionately about that time. But you kept CalBank afloat. What did you do?
So this is a period of this so-called asset quality review.
Yes, and the banking sector cleanup. As they call it.
That banking sector cleanup, I have my views.
I want to hear.
And I have to be very careful, so I do not sound too controversial. But let me take you back into history. Under Ignatius Kutu Achampon, a military ruler, okay? During this time, almost all the banks in this country had a crisis. And in those days, there were no private banks. There were only government banks, and then Standard Chartered and Barclays, which were owned by the Brits. When it happened, I think it was as a result of a massive devaluation of the currency, et cetera, and they had dollar loans, so all those loans tanked and the capital of the bank appeared. Achampon, who people deride, and for me is one of the best heads of states we've had, did not collapse any bank. He had the banks issue bonds, non-performing asset bonds. And the government of Ghana bought those bonds. Okay? In buying those bonds, he recapitalized all the banks, including Standard Chartered and Barclays, and set up something called Non-Performing Assets Recovery Trust, NPART, and set NPART as a secretariat. I think he gave them 25 years to work with the banks to recover the bad loans. Okay? So he threw the banks a lifeline. Nobody lost his job. No bank was collapsed. And said if NPART is able to recover 30% of the loans, they've done very well. Okay? Fast forward to 2017, 2018. What did we do? We collapsed, or they used the word, I've forgotten the word they used. We collapsed 8 or so banks.
Yeah.
People lost their jobs.
Yeah.
We spent, depending on who you listen to, but I remember the Minister of Finance at the time mentioning like 20
billion, yes.
To do this, to cause people to lose their jobs. and to collapse 8 or so banks. I find it amazing.
What's amazing about it?
Why would you collapse the banks? Because the banks could have been recapitalized. And a number of those banks were owed significant amounts of money by the government. And I remember I got a phone call one day to come to Jubilee House, or Flagstaff House as it was called, at 2 p.m. And I was ushered into the auditorium and it was full. So sitting, and they gave me a chair. There were about 100 people there, but they had left a chair right in front for me. And next to me was Bill Poplampo, who was the chairman of Royal Bank.
Yeah.
And across from the table was President Akufo-Addo and his team, including Akoto Osei. I don't remember whether Ken was there. I remember Akoto Osei because Akoto Osei spoke, Jambafo, all of them. And this meeting apparently had been going on since 10 a.m. or so about the banks who were going to be dissolved or shut down. So I'm wondering, what am I doing here? CalBank's not on that list. Anyway, so I sat down. Then I saw that my chairman was there. He was somewhere in the back. So why would my chairman be in the back and I'm in front anyway? So the conversation was going on. And then they asked me to speak. And I said, but Mr. President, on record, your government owes these banks a lot of money. Unibank, all these banks, even CalBank is good money. You know? So why wouldn't you simply pay the monies you owe these people, and some of these significant debts would basically be resolved? So Akoto Osei, may his soul rest in peace, flared up. And he was talking, and I kept quiet. Then the president said, but Minister, what Mr. Edu is saying is true. We owe the banks quite a bit of money. I said, if you paid those monies, and all of these problems would disappear. So why wouldn't you take the 20 billion that you used to resolve these banks, to settle government debts owed to these banks? I've kept quiet about this for quite a long while. And again, I don't know why I agreed to this interview, but you asked me, so I'll say it. I think that whole process was ill-informed. I don't believe that we should have gone down that route. Ill-informed by what? What did that inform? I will know. I mean, I gave you the example of what Achampon did. Yes, yes. You know, I gave you that example of what Achampon did. And up to today, I wish I could find somebody in government at the time who would explain to me the process, the thinking processes that went behind that action that government took. Because I remember at the time we were told that banks were misusing their liquidity support. Yes. There was a 600 million that was given to, I believe, Capital Bank. And the CEO is in jail for that. Yes. He's been very well. So, but did you have to collapse the bank? Should the iniquities of one person or a board of a bank be visited on the employees and their families? And those who had monies in the bank, customers? Yes. You know? And up to today, we haven't seen the balance sheet of that exercise as to whether the total liabilities of these 8 resolved banks equated 20 billion or whatever it was that was used to resolve those banks. So you obviously a very smart banker. You must have had your own theory as to, so if you don't believe the reasons as we're told, what really do you think happened there? Because it was quite an expensive one for the government. They said they didn't have money. If you look at why the economy tanked later, Baumia himself will reference the 20 billion as one of those, because if you, it's the top 3 line items. You mentioned that, you mentioned any sector debt. It has always been a big deal for them. It gave them a huge red, and yet they did it. There must be a reason, fundamentally public interest reason why they did that. You haven't still found out. Public interest? Well, that's what we're told, that this was done because in the public interest to do so. If the people lose their jobs? Yes. En masse? Is that public? Is that in the interest of the public? I mean, look, if a board of a bank or management has done anything unlawful, gull them, as you gulled Asian. That's his name, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's what he said.
Yes. You understand me? I do not, I'm still waiting for the opportunity to sit down with any of the decision makers at the time to explain to me why government chose that course of action.
But that's fascinating. I mean, for banking colossus like you still don't know that. It's
you see, I don't want to go to the specifics. Which one was? There was a bank chaired by Kwesi Boche.
Yeah, forgot the name. There were so many.
Adongo or Agongo's bank.
Yes. So that was
that bank had not taken deposits.
Yeah,
it was collapsed. It's one of the. It's for me.
So do you think then there was a political motivation for this? Because some have.
I'm not going to sit here and conjecture and assume or try and find out. That's what I'm saying. I would want somebody who was part of the decision making to come and tell me exactly what informed that decision. I do not believe that we had to resolve those banks to cure the problems in the banking sector. In any case, as we speak, what is the NPL ratio of the banking sector?
Because I was coming to ask you that now. The cleanup was done. It was called a banking sector cleanup. Is the banking sector now better for it?
To be honest with you, before you came, I was telling your producer that, since I retired, I haven't even read a newspaper.
Interesting.
I haven't been following. I've limited myself to things that will please my mind and allow me to sleep at night. What I've concerned myself with, which also annoys me quite a bit, is Galamsey.
Okay, we'll talk about that.
But
since it's something that everybody else, everybody. I mean, just based on your own friends in the banking sector, would you hazard a guess if it's better? Was it better for us long term? Maybe at the time we thought it was bad, but now we've had some time to assess its impact. Would you say?
I think the banks are showing some resilience, but they are operating in a very difficult environment. Inflation went up northwards of 50%. Yes. It's not possible to manage a bank successfully under those circumstances. And when interest rates are high, you're definitely going to have non-paying customers. Not necessarily because they don't want to repay their loans. Some don't want to, but it's very difficult for you to do the business that you need to do to be able to repay your loans. So the banking sector don't necessarily have challenges. But I think my former colleagues have done a good job trying to manage the situation. And some of them are making quite a bit of profit.
The current administration had campaigned on the back of one key promise in the banking sector that they will reinstate some of the banks. Unibank, for example, they had mentioned that it's something that they will reconsider to reinstate them. Do you think that would be a good idea?
I think that's far-fetched. I mean, to reinstate a bank's license does not give it back its assets and liabilities. The assets were customer deposits. Those customer deposits have moved on. Okay? Sorry, the liabilities are customer deposits. Those customer deposits have moved on. The assets are customer loans. They moved on. So maybe the best thing to do is that if you take, I think they will put into CBG.
CBG, yes.
If you take CBG, then you say that you will now give CBG to the owners of the banks which will collapse into CBG. And depending on how much you contributed to the total balance sheet of CBG, that becomes your percentage holding in CBG. But to reinstate a Unibank, I don't see how that is feasible.
So you advise?
You see, it's not as if you seized Accra Brewery from me, and now Sally is in power and says, I'm going to give Accra Brewery back to Frank. That's different. The bank disappeared. UT Bank does not exist. You cannot give UT Bank back to Kofi Amwabing. But if UT Bank is in CBG or GAT, then you can say if UT Bank's assets contributed to 20% of the capitalization of CBG or GAT, then UT Bank owns 20% of GAT. But to give it back I don't know how that's going to work.
That's going to work. So that, give me your thoughts on the economy. I mean, you say you don't listen to the news, but the economy, everybody feels it.
I don't read the newspapers.
But you feel the economy.
Of course.
I mean, let's do it then and now, because you, at the time, you were still the CEO of CalBank. You played in the economy quite strongly. If you look at the economy then, that we now have switched, and we'll come to this economy current, because many say that the city's performing miracles now, and people are questioning it, but the fundamentals haven't really changed. So what really is happening? If you look to the way it was handled in the past under Ken Ofori-Atta, and I've read somewhere that Ken Ofori is a very good friend of yours, was he not? Because before I came here, I was reading.
This it was.
Or is. I don't know. Because I get a sense that something may have happened that tested your friendship. But let me ask that. He was, and he's still your friend. True?
We are kind of family.
Yes.
So, Ken Ofori-Atta's grandfather, let me get it right, grandfather, Ofori-Atta the first is the half-brother of J.B. Dankwa. And J.B. Dankwa is my grand-uncle. Yeah. J.B. Dankwa is my grandmother's brother. So, and my first trip to the U.S., I stayed with Ken. We slept in the same bed.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so that's the relationship.
So, but something happened, because I was reading about it, I mean, and...
We're reading about it where?
Well, I mean, a lot has been written about you. You're such a very powerful, famous person. I'm
Really?
pretty sure you may have not read everything that has been written about you.
No, I don't.
Exactly. But there's one that suggested that at the time when the BOG rules were changed, it might have been changed with you in mind. The governance, the banking sector governance rules and the tenure and the separation of chairman and CEO and all that may have been
But would that be Ken? Wouldn't that be the Bank of Ghana? Or you think he influences the governor?
But you know the BOG has never been one that is independent of the finance minister's control. But those who write those say that that may have tested your friendship with Ken quite a bit. Are they right?
You know, Ken is Ken. Let leave him be. Let him deal with his. We all pray for his recovery. But I do not blame anything on Ken.
Who'd you blame it on?
You mean my forced retirement from the bank?
Now you've used the word.
Is that what you're talking about?
Forced retirement, yes.
Yeah, that's how I put it in. Well, I say forced because I had a contract which hadn't expired.
Yeah.
And the governor thought that he would use this administrative decision to cause me to take early retirement. And I bless him for it, because I think I've profited from that. You know, I know I made him aware of the fact that it is not right for him to do what he's doing.
So you mean Addison?
Oh yes, Addison, yes. Because you cannot use an administrative fiat to frustrate an existing contract. That's what the lawyers say. There are people, very powerful people, who suggested that I should take the issue up in court. But for me, it wasn't necessary. What would I go to court for? You know, I started work with the intention of retiring at 55. And I retired at 57. So it was never my intention to get to 60. You know, and today when I go to bed, I sleep. I don't have to worry about bad loans and all capital adequacy ratios and all these things, you know. So I think he did me a favor.
So that was a confirmation that I'm happy to have gotten from you with this forced retirement.
Yeah.
You were forced to retire?
No, it was an administrative fiat which came and says, if you've served more than 12 years as CEO,
you have to go. Yes. Yeah. Yes. But at the time, mere mortals saw that, oh, but this is a BOG just doing what BOG should do. It had nothing to do with Frankie B. Jr. But you say this was a cover for
But I was the only person who left.
Okay. So this was crafted to get you?
I would never say, I won't suggest that. All I know is that I'm the only person who left.
At the time?
Yes.
At the time.
But I wasn't the only person who had done, I don't think I was the only person who had done 12 years.
Yeah. And it was important, of course, once that was put in place, it was impossible for you to stay. So you had to let go.
It was what?
It was, once that was crafted, that administrative fiat, it was impossible for you to stay. So you had to.
I could have stayed if I'd gone to court.
You had to. What? But you chose not to challenge it.
What is the point? I mean, go to court and defeat the governor in court, and then go for a meeting with him. It's a Pyrrhic victory. There was no point. There was no way I was going to do that.
But I was always fascinated, though. What about Frankie Duke Jr. will get a whole central bank to issue an administrative directive that, in essence, will take you out?
Which is what I'm saying, that I don't think that it was necessarily targeted at me. If it was targeted at me, then you should be asking Addison why, because he was the governor at the time.
But you were at least at the time, the only victim of that administrative.
Maybe others went to argue their case. I chose to walk the plank. But walking the plank didn't mean I was committing suicide. That's why I say that I have actually profited from the fact that I left at the time I left. You know, and you must always leave when the applause is loudest. So I thank him because he showed me the way. And
you do not at all put any blame at the foot of Ken?
He wasn't the governor.
Okay.
If he had anything to do with it, I wouldn't know, but he wasn't the governor.
Seeing that his family, and you know him, when you look back on his tenure as finance minister, what would your verdict be?
Disaster.
Disaster?
Of course. Look, if it wasn't disastrous between him and the president, the people of Ghana wouldn't have voted the way they voted. It's not me saying. The verdict is captured in the results of the elections. It's as simple as that. You know, you do not run the economy where almost everybody is suffering, okay, and expect that the people will not object. And that's what the voters of this country did last year.
I mean, it's fascinating you say that. I mean, I remember very vividly when he was appointed. There was a renewed sense of hope and optimism because of his background.
Yeah.
You know him. You slept in his bed in the US. And he really had built a reputation from the US. Correct. With data bank. Yeah. So everybody thought if you really needed a man, a finance minister for our time, Ken was the guy because of his international experience. We're going to bring all that to bear. But here you are, 8 years on, described his tenure as disastrous. What happened?
I don't know what happened. I mean, I remember when he was appointed, I sent him a message congratulating him and urging him to do the best he could for this country and leave a legacy, you know. And that is what we all expected. We were all very hopeful. But subsequent events have betrayed that hope. You know, I don't think that the NPP government, in the last 4 years of their reign, did what they could have done. I think they could have done much better. I mean, to even think of the fact that I would take pensioners' money, that's dark. You know, a pensioner is like a 6-year-old orphan. No parents. Because when we were growing up, it was thought that when you are an adult, you take care of your parents. Your generation, you don't think that way. You understand? Yeah. You don't think that way. And so pensioners, people my age, and I'm on the pensioners bondholders platform.
So you're a pensioner yourself?
Yes, I'm over 60. Yeah. Okay? And I didn't think that, I knew based on what had happened in Greece, etc., that something like that would happen because government debt was unsustainable. The debt service was unsustainable. But I didn't think that anybody would include pensioners. It doesn't make sense that the person is 70, 65, 67. He has all the ailments that go with old age. Okay, he needs the liquidity to buy medicine. And in fact, the environment is so harsh now that pensioners, grandfathers are taking care of their grandchildren, those who can afford it. And then you come and you say, I'm taking pensioners' money. Why would you do that? I mean, any mind which goes down that lane is a dark mind. And we don't need to pull any punches on that, you know. You don't touch pensioners. When Kwesi Kwarteng or whatever his name was, the
Former Deputy Finance Minister.
no, in the UK.
In the UK. Yeah, oh yeah, our Ghanaian fellow who became the finance minister.
Yes.
He miscalculated.
That when he brought that budget,
Yes.
which was going to cost pensioners.
It was
to
gone in
lose.
days.
The governor of the Bank of England bought government bonds every day to make sure that pensioners don't lose their pension. And then we do the reverse here. Why would you do that? Why would you go after pensioners' money? It's one thing that people can never forgive Akufo-Addo and Kenneth Friata for.
You lost money.
I lost money. Well, pensioners picketed. The former CJ came to picket with us, etc.
So you were also on the Sun. You were on the Sun picketing.
No, I didn't. I
didn't
didn't go.
go.
I didn't go to picket.
But those colleagues, pensioners of yours.
Yeah.
Did.
Those who were working the technical details behind the scene and those who were vociferous out front there, etc. You know, but I lost money in the Eurobond.
Yeah. You said those who lost money will never forgive Akufo-Addo and Ken. You have never forgiven them.
No, I will not. I will not, because I saw them live large.
You saw them live large.
Yes, they live large, you know, and so why do you want to live large at the expense of my pension? You understand me?
Yeah.
It's something that should not be trivialized at all. To have a cabinet meeting and decide that in solving the country's debt problems, I'm going to include pensioners. That's dark.
That is Frank Edu Jr. I'm going to take a quick break. When I return, I'll talk about Galamsey. He says if there's anything he pays attention to now, it's that. But we'll also talk about where we are right now. He's running school, very powerful, famous school, and he's the board chair and co-founder. We'll talk about that too. I would be remiss not to ask him to give me his take on the last 6 months of this new administration. They're doing some great things, at least you feel it in your pocket. The CD is performing wonders. I'll ask him what his own assessment of the fundamentals and whether this is something that can be sustained. But the lessons that he has gained over the years, can he share a bit of that with the current government? He saw the beginning of the Ken Ofori-Atta days, and I'm pretty sure he had warned him and said he sent him a text. If he had to send a text now to Ato Forcing, what would it be? And I'll pick his thoughts on that and everything else about Ghana that he is involved in. Stay with us. My guest is still Frank Edu Jr. And I promised you he's not going to pull punches, and he hasn't. But we've learned a bit about his own journey into banking and how he started. Fascinating stuff indeed. And his own assessment of the economy then. But what about the economy now? But also something I'm looking forward to talking to him about. He's involved in a lot of things. And as I said at the beginning, he says he's retired, but there are a lot of institutions and people still picking his brain on a lot of things. AUCB is the latest, and we'll talk about that, the Africa University of Communications and Business. He's involved there too, one way or the other, and I'll ask him about it, because I've seen the announcement recently, and I'm interested in his work with them. But, Mr. Dude, so let's talk about the last 6 months then. You've given us a fair idea of what you make of the previous administration, how they run the economy. And then we had elections, and then huge change. I mean, the outcome of the election says it all. In fact, you referenced it. What's your verdict on the last 6 months?
It's early days yet. And I think every time there's a change of government, the government seems to have a period of some honeymoon period, so to speak, and people are accommodating, etc. I think that President Mahama, he made promises, and the thing for him to do is to try and keep the promises. Luckily, we've had some stability, particularly in the currency. There's been an appreciation of the CD, and that seems to have stabilized around 11, 12 CDs. So it allows for planning, etc. Hopefully that continues. I think the difficulty is in keeping those promises. and the kind of political system we're operating in this country basically forces contestants to make promises, and then when they come, they have a difficulty meeting those promises. And that is where then you begin to have the challenge. So far, so good, but President Mahama has to be mindful of how his appointees deliver. It's going to be very difficult, and it's one of the reasons being the processes you go through to become president, and then the appointments you make. So, for instance, I have not seen or heard in the past probably 18 years any minister of a sector or a president criticize or question an appointee for non-performance. And you know why? It's because all these appointees are political affiliates. And so if the person say, let's say any of the parastatals, let's say VRA or ECG, the CEO being a political appointee is not performing. Now, this political appointee was part of the whole campaign train of the president when he was campaigning. He puts him there, and the person is not performing. It's very difficult for the sector minister, who is also a political appointee, to take on, say, the minister for power, if there's a minister for power, to take on the MD of VRA for non-performance. So anytime there's a problem with any sector, any ministry, you find the party, the minister, defending the position that, or the mismanagement or whatever it is. I have never come across any minister query, criticize, say, I will have you fired, or fire the CEO of a parastatal for non-performance. That is the problem, you see, and it's also because what we are practicing is not a meritocracy. Today, if Sally here wants to be a minister, all she has to do is join one of the political parties and become a communicator. The more noise you make whilst in opposition, the likely your chance of becoming a CEO of a parastatal or a minister or something like that. Yeah. That is not a meritocracy. You understand me? So once you have a situation like that, then it's going to be very difficult for the government in power to perform. If you are not held to account for your deeds as a minister or as a political appointee, it means that you can underperform. And that happened under Akufo-Addo. Yeah. You take the cigar companies, okay? All these parastatals, which one of them performed? Which one of them? Maybe SIC, they pay dividends, etc. But which one of them performed?
So what's your advice to John Mahama then?
I think that if you want the country to move forward, you must appoint people irrespective of their political inclination. And make sure that even if they are all NDC, make sure they are given the job on merit. Okay. And not because they made the most noise whilst we were in opposition.
I mean, finally on this,
I may be naive, but I'm coming from the private sector. You do not reward non-performance in the private sector. Yeah. I'm not going to give you the job of a regional manager or brand manager or deputy MD simply because you kowtowed to me or you always sing my praises. No. I'm going to give you the job because I believe you can do the job. And you have demonstrated that you can do the job. Yeah. You know. And so if you have a collection of people who are not all of them, but if you have a majority of them who are square pegs and round holes, then you're going to have a situation where there's going to be non-performance, and that affects your performance as the president of the country.
And by extension, all of us may probably land in another DDEP because people were underperforming. Yeah. If you had one advice, when Ken was there, you sent him a message. Yeah. you had one advice for the president and his finance minister, what would that be? Based on all the years of wisdom that you've acquired, what would you give them?
Corruption. This country has, as far as I'm concerned, two problems: your political system and corruption. And if President Mahama is able to curb, you can never do away with corruption, but is able to deal with corruption to a large extent and hold people accountable, not just the past government, but his own appointees accountable, he will send the right signal. You know, I'm going to give you an example. I promised myself I wasn't going to give that example, but I will. When I was at the bank, a client of ours brought a contract.
Okay.
I'm not going to say which government. So the client needed $3 million to finance the contract, the equivalent of $3 million. We looked at it, we financed it. Between the time of delivery and between the time of ordering the product, etc., and delivery, there was what they call a variation. And government accepted the variation. When the client was paid, he was paid the equivalent of $25 million.
Wow, when you
That's
give him
8 times.
when you give him $4 million.
It doesn't matter how good your finance minister is. It doesn't matter how good the president is. There is no way that you can deal with an 8 times increase in the price of any product. And it wasn't an isolated incident. You know, and it continues up to today. So procurement fraud is critical. It's killing this country. We've seen it all over the place. We've seen, I don't want to give examples that would place it in any particular government, but it goes on.
Yeah.
You know, so that kind of corruption, there's no amount of IMF intervention or good governance by the finance minister which is going to curb this. You know, and until President Mahama decides that, look, I'm going to make sure that these things don't happen, we're going to have this problem going on and on.
And then Galamsey. I guess same approach to it too.
You know, I've been speaking about Galamsey for years.
Really?
Yeah. I fail to understand how a people of sound mind would collectively allow a few people to destroy the environment, particularly water bodies, because I want to make money. It's insane. You know, the water that you drink, you pollute. When our forefathers were founding the villages, they were setting up villages near water bodies.
Yeah.
You know, I'm from Chebi and Tafo. The Boardroom River is the source. You understand me? The people from Chebi, we swear by the Boardroom, I think all Boardroom, etc. Today, you cannot drink from the Boardroom. You cannot be happy, and it is perpetuated by people from Achim. How do you? I stretch my imagination that far, and I still do not understand. And yet, governments come and pay lip service to it. And at this point, I'll criticize President Mahama. When he was in the position, Akufo-Addo said, President Akufo-Addo said, I will
political career on the
stake
line.
my political career on that. That was lip service, really. Today, I'm a member of the coalition against Galamsey.
Okay.
Led by the venerable, redoubtable Kenashigwe, and I doff my hat out, and then Erastus Asari Donko. We are having a tough time getting this government to act in appreciation of this crisis called Galamsey. And the thing about Galamsey right now, and I'm sure the security service would agree, even if not publicly, that because of the way it's become an area for the festering and development of terrorist gangs.
Yeah.
You know, because now they're using heavy equipment and they're using sophisticated equipment, weapons. So if we are not careful, we'll now be breeding the equivalents of your Boko Harams in these forests, and they're shooting to kill.
Yeah.
So why aren't we taking a more drastic measures against this thing?
What drastic measures do you think?
Look, we've been asking for a state of emergency. You know, you cannot fight Galamsey. Right now, it's also become the source of livelihood for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. You know, but we cannot allow it to continue, because then we're on a path of self-destruction. The people who are perpetrating this are not, when you go and burn 60 champagnes, you've done nothing. Champagnes are not even imported. They are manufactured locally. Yes. You understand me? But I'm sure that they all know the big men and women behind this Galamsey. This Awin MP, for instance. Yeah. We made a petition to the speaker, and he says, I will deal with it. We are still waiting. You know? And I'm not talking politics here. I'm simply talking survival. Nobody, if there's evidence against any individual on this Galamsey thing, he should be arrested. I was called into a meeting by one of the country's old, respected citizens. He asked me to come to his house, and I went to his house, and he asked me a question. Assuming, in the unlikely event, that President Mahama, he says he had me on Newsfile. Assuming President Mahama puts you in charge of Galamsey, what would you do? And I said, Accra, in the first week, I will arrest, legally or illegally, any known member of society, the big men, mm-hmm. chiefs, politicians, businessmen, who are behind Galamsey. I will take the chance of being sued for wrongful arrest. I will forget the people, the small boys running this champagne business. Yeah. Because they didn't provide the capital to buy an excavator. No. He says, hey, that was his reaction. I said, it seems like you're surprised. I said, until we go to the head, you're not fighting this thing. Yeah. You know, why would you have the temerity to shoot at the Forestry Commission guards doing their jobs? You actually blocked the road, you stopped them. And then the IGP says, I've moved the commanders, I've changed the commanders. The new commanders are going there. It's also my chance to make money. You understand me? So the fight against Galamsey, it's complex, but it can be dealt with if we really want to deal with it. So
your verdict so far on this current government is that they still haven't shown you any real commitment to approach the problem?
No. Kofi Amabo is talking about river guards, and I think today they announced something, some office, some new office.
A dedicated office that would do with
this thing is war. This thing is war. It's affecting, look, water, underground water is stored in aquifers and moves. So if there's Galamsey taking place in Boku,
to get worse.
It will get you to get you in Accra, you know, and we are joking with it. Right now, all of us are falling sick, and we don't know we are falling sick because a few people, less than 0.001% of the population, has decided that we are going to make money through this way. Why?
And today, for example, had a conversation on the morning show, and we opened the phone lines on this. Ghanaians are so upset that they believe we should adopt the military approach of shoot and kill in the forest. That's how extreme people are getting to.
I don't fault them. You probably should even go to some country and open your skies to them and say they should use drone technology and bomb all these Galamsey sites, because you can map them. You know, what is this? I mean, I still don't understand why you would encourage. And you know, it's going to be like Colombia, where eventually the cartels running this Galamsey business will control the politicians, because they can fund you to become an MP.
They're actually funding. I mean, CDD have done campaign financing, illicit flow into campaigns financing, and a lot of it is coming from the. In fact, the speaker himself acknowledged and reprimanded his own MPs that.
And they say now 11% of our forest reserves are gone.
It's gone, yeah.
11% is a huge number.
Extremely.
It's a huge number, you know. So and this is flora and fauna that is required for the sustenance of the entire country. And a few people, and they're getting support. We're paying lip service to this because you're not going to a I'm not there. I'm not seeing it. But you cannot have. I've seen fetus of a baby in the kidney pan. You know the kidney pan. The one is it's about this big, and a 7-month-old fetus fits in it in the Galamsey site. Why?
That is Frank Edu Jr., still my guest here on PM Express. And let's switch a bit. Let's talk about something you just recently got yourself involved in, the Africa University
Communications and Business.
AUCB, Africa University Communications and Business. You've been appointed as the
First Chancellor.
First Chancellor. That's fascinating.
It's interesting. I was actually quite surprised when I was approached, and I thought it was an honor to be chosen by the founder of the school to be the first chancellor of AUCB.
What's your role there? What would you be doing exactly?
So, a chancellor is a ceremonial titular head of the university. In the past, the government universities had the president as chancellor, all the way from Achampon, I think, up until President Kufuor, who then appointed chancellors in his stead. So you are a ceremonial titular head. Now, a chancellor can decide to be purely ceremonial and show up at convocations and congregations and graduation ceremonies, etc., and wear the mortar board and the gown, when we go, it's called it akapompo, academic pomposity, you know. Or you can also decide to be an effective chancellor by actually helping the school grow, raising funds for the school, getting involved in academics, etc., defining strategy, etc. And I choose the second role.
Okay, so you're going to be very involved in trying to help the school grow.
Yes. You know, universities must be, every university started small. And if you take Roman School, we started with 22 students, I think, 11 or so, 2002. Today there are 800. We didn't think that it would become this big, you know. So AUCB has been around for almost 20 years, now got their charter. They're working very, very hard. It's still a small school, one campus. But hopefully, over time, I'll be able to help them to grow.
What about AUCB attracts you?
Education attracts me. Okay. So like I said, my initial career plans was to be a lecturer.
Yeah. Which you actually started.
Yes, I was a teaching assistant, and then that's a start of that.
So this is you going back to your first love?
Basically.
Okay.
Basically.
You won't get stuck because first love is first love, you know.
But that's why I have Roman School.
Come to think of it, yes. Yes.
Know, so.
But this is, from what you've described, this is you now rolling up your sleeves. Not just as chairman and founder, you actually want to help in terms of...
That's what I intend to do. You know, I've had a couple of meetings with management, and the Vice Chancellor, Abiku, when I met with him and his management team, said to them, this is, Mr. Edu was my TA in 1984. And if he's still the TA that I knew, then we are in for an interesting ride. I like to push boundaries. I like to challenge things and get things working, and the feeling of success is always good.
Yeah. So, when will you stop?
When will I stop?
Yeah. You keep going. I mean, AUCB is the latest one. You started, mentoring young people, taking roles in businesses that are startups, etc., to try and get them to the next level. You're a board chair and founder of, the school where we are interviewing you from, and you keep doing things. I mean, but you say you've retired, so are you? You're not. It doesn't look like you're stopping.
The thing is,
it looks like you're picking up momentum.
You have to have a balance. You should never say I'm retired, so I'm going to sit at home and play my I don't have grandchildren yet.
You're playing golf.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. In the mornings, I'm physical. I play golf. In the afternoons, I'm cerebral. I come here, I sit on a number of boards, and before you came, there are no board papers. You have collected them away. I read board papers. I advise all the companies I serve on, etc., etc. And then in the evening, I relax. So, but I'm not doing anything stressful. If you came to me for advice, consultancy, I will not write you a report and I won't charge you. I'll listen to your problem, we'll have meetings over 2 days, I'll give you advice and you go.
Okay.
That I think is very fulfilling. You know, it's not everything that has to be monetized.
Okay.
But if you stop, then your brain goes and then you're finished.
So that's why you're keeping very active.
I'm trying to follow in the footsteps of Ishmael Yamson. Ishmael Yamson is 81. He plays golf every morning. He's always in the suite, chairing some meeting, doing some, Sam Jonah, same thing, You shouldn't stop. If you stop, you die.
You're right, and all of them are your golf buddies.
Yes.
And so you're following. Of course, they are much older than you.
Oh yes, Sam Jonah is 75 and still standing, as he likes to put it.
Yeah.
Ishmael Yamson is 81 or 82. Still working very hard.
He was so recently chairing the economic forum to try and turn around this country.
Correct. But I'm upset with him because he didn't invite me to that forum.
He will hear you. I'm pretty sure he'll hear you too on the golf course when you meet him. I mean, many have said that this country's problem is leadership. You agree?
Absolutely. I don't think we've had leaders. We've had rulers.
Okay.
And people... the political system we have is flawed. And I think
what should we have instead?
I don't know. I recently read something. I've been reading the story of China, and, it's all based on meritocracy. Today, this thing that we have as a democracy, it's not helping us. Why would you come to power and because the previous government started a project, and if you finish the project, they will get credit for it. So you won't continue the project.
So you abandon it.
You abandon it. That's our resources. These are our taxes. And I asked the question, if it was your money, would you do that? If it was your money, would you go and dig a $58 million hole and say you're building? Look, we're all Christians. Why would you do that? It's something that we have to look at this thing properly and say what works for us. I have always advocated for a long-term plan. That plan should not be changed per the whims and caprices of some president. The fact that you are president doesn't mean you are wise. It means you're politically savvy. And what is also happening is that when politicians get power, they continue doing politics. They do not govern. They make political decisions at every turn. And we do not need political decisions to develop a country. We need focused developmental decisions. But if I'm going to make it, every decision I'm going to make is going to be political, then you're doomed. And I've heard a senior member of parliament say in parliament, we are politicians. Politics is what we do. But politics is not what we need to develop the country. So when you've won the elections, can you govern and stop doing politics? You understand me? But because we're still doing politics, we make political appointments that don't serve us any good. We make political decisions on funding sources. We make political decisions on what to invest in, etc. That doesn't make sense.
This 4-year cycle, does it serve us?
I'm sorry. I mean, I criticized it at Achimoto Speaks, I think, and Professor Asante was sitting in front of me, the chairman of the consultative committee, and he didn't. Well, he's a very nice gentleman. I have a lot of respect for him, and he had to get up to speak to defend it. But this 4-year cycle is not.
So what should we have instead?
Well, I have, I think one of the reasons why we have corruption is because of this 4-year thing we have, this national elections, presidential elections, and so now we are saying that to prosecute a proper presidential campaign, you need $100 million. How are you going to raise $100 million? So when you're in power, you will steal the money. You basically do things to make sure that you have a war chest which will allow you to prosecute the next political agenda of becoming president. So I'm president today, and you are in opposition. If I leave and you become president, your thinking is that when Frank was in power, he and his party were probably able to take $250 million for the next election. Then I'm going to take 500 million. Okay? And it continues and continues. So we see corruption increase with every government. Yeah. We must find a way of stopping that. My proposal is every country has the right to choose what it considers as a democratic process. We are using universal adult suffrage, and we are using multi-party democracy. The US has had a dual-party system for 200 and something years. Yeah. Nothing stops us from having that. And nothing stops us from saying that at the level of the presidency, no more elections. We have elections at the level of MPs. But every party selects its presidential candidate. We have a national development plan of 50 years. It can be tweaked, but the fundamental pillars of that development plan will not be changed. Okay? Forget these manifestos. They're a load of rubbish. Funny manifestos, not helping anybody. Okay? And then, so NDC comes, they rule for 6 years or 8 years as president, one term, then the next government comes in. But you're having a 4-year cycle of voting for MPs. The tenure of the MPs should not be coterminous with that of the president. And because it's not a party manifesto, you are carrying along what the country thinks is good for it. Okay. Now, when you do that, you must also, I also disagree with this situation where you find MPs on boards, board chairman. That is ludicrous. If I am an MP, and you make me chairman of VRA, and VRA has to come to Public Accounts Committee, and I am on the Public Accounts Committee of Parliament, how does that work? There was a Constitutional Review Committee which was chaired by Osechi Mensambonsu, yeah, etc., and Haruna Idris, etc., and I was invited there. And my proposal was simple. You know, an MP should be limited to Parliament. An MP should not become a Minister of State. An MP should not become a board member of any parastatal or chair any parastatal, because it's conflicting. You know, and you know, there's something that should be done, some fundamental things that I think we should do simply to sanitize the situation and limit the influence of bad politics in governance and in development, in our development agenda.
Fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you,
Frankie Jr. And that's the man, Frankie Jr., speaking to us about almost everything. And we're going to waiting to see his transformation that he is set to bring at AU,
God help me.
Communications
God
business.
help me.
Everywhere he's been, when I began, I said, it appears that anything he touches it turns to gold. And so I'm not surprised that he's been appointed to that particular role. I'm grateful that he joined us. I'm pretty sure that he's left us with a bit of a lot to chew on, indeed. Enjoy the rest of everybody. PMX is always brought to you by Syntax Tanks, also brought to you by Academic Times Newspaper and Pepsodent Cavity Fighter.